My favorite son, Preston, walked in with a piece of paper in his hand and a voice I'd never heard before. A cold, arrogant, bossy kind of voice. He said, "Mom, sign here. We're having you committed." Those two words, committed, they just echoed in my living room. It was like the floor, the sturdy linoleum I'd stood on for 50 years, had just vanished right out from under my feet. The air left my lungs, you know? A knot formed in my throat so tight I couldn't swallow. Committed. Like he was saying, pass the sugar. As if it was the most normal thing in the world for a son to show up at his widowed mother's house, the mother who raised him with her whole life's effort, and announce that her place was now somewhere else. My Lord, my entire world, everything I had built, everything I believed in. It felt like it all just cracked right then and there. I was in shock. Inside, a hurricane of emotions was brewing. A mix of pain, a quiet rage, a disbelief so deep it squeezed my chest. But on the outside, on the outside, I showed no weakness. I couldn't, not in front of him, and certainly not in front of that wife of his, Tiffany, who was standing behind him, peeking over his shoulder with this look of fake pity on her face. She looked like a marble statue, cold, expensive, and completely soulless. So I did the only thing my survival instinct told me to do. I shrank. I let my shoulders slump, blinked slowly like I was trying to process something real complicated. I tilted my head and used the shakiest voice I could find. Committed? But why, honey? I don't feel sick? Preston sighed. That impatient sigh I knew so well, the same one he'd give when I'd ask him to explain for the third time how to use the new cell phone. He sat down in the chair across from me, at my kitchen table, and pushed the paper closer to my hand. He explained, like he was talking to a child, that they were worried about me, that I'd been forgetful lately. And then he started the list. Every word was another weight on my chest. He reminded me of the week before, when I supposedly left the stove on. I didn't remember that, but he said it with such certainty. He brought up last month when I lost $200 I'd taken out of the bank. He said I'd probably thrown it in the trash by mistake. At the time I didn't question it, but now the memory of him walking into the kitchen right when I was looking for that money came back to me with a terrifying clarity. He'd helped me look for it, of course. As he talked, his voice started to fade, turning into a distant buzz. And my whole life, my whole struggle, it flashed before my eyes like a movie. I saw myself, at 28, getting the news that my Robert wasn't coming home. His hard hat on the table, covered in dust from the construction site. And 4 little faces staring up at me, not understanding why their mama was crying like that. Daniel, my oldest, at 11, trying to be the man of the house and failing miserably. Angela, bless her heart, at 8, already looking after Kevin, my 2-year-old baby. And Preston, my Preston, just 6 years old, quiet in a corner, with his big, frightened eyes. That night, after I put them all to bed, I looked at myself in the mirror and I made a promise. I promised myself and my Robert, wherever he was, that those children would have everything, that I would be both father and mother. And I was. My God, I truly was. I spent 15 years working 2 jobs. By day, I cleaned the offices of rich men downtown in Nashville. I'd come home, fix supper, help with homework, and when they were asleep, I'd sit down at my old Singer sewing machine and stay up all night hemming dresses and mending clothes for the fancy ladies in the neighborhood. My fingers were always sore. My back ached in a way that sometimes I'd just cry quietly into my pillow so no one would hear. I went a whole decade without buying a new dress for myself. Every single spare penny was for them. For Daniel's brand-name sneakers, for Angela's braces, for Kevin's diapers. But the biggest share always went to Preston. He was my star, the boy who only got straight A's, who won the spelling bees. He was my ticket out of that life of scraping by. And I invested in him like you invest in the stock market. I sold Robert's car, our only luxury, to pay for a college prep course. I took out a loan A loan that took me 8 years to pay off, to send him to a private university for law school. I did it all with a smile on my face, because he was my pride and joy. On his graduation day, he hugged me in front of everyone, in that black cap and gown, and whispered in my ear, "This is all for you, Mom. I'm going to give you the world, you'll see." And for a while, I believed him. I believed him when he passed the bar, when he got his first job at a fancy law firm, when he married Tiffany and bought that house that looked like something out of a movie. But the world he promised never came. What came were generic Christmas cards, rushed phone calls on my birthday, excuses. "Oh, Mom, this weekend is just slammed. Tiffany's parents are in town. We'd love to come for Sunday lunch, but we have an engagement we just can't get out of." And me, the foolish mother, the mother blinded by pride, I always said, "That's all right, son. Mama understands. Mama understands." Mama understood he had an important life. But Mama didn't understand how that boy, the boy I gave my health, my sweat, and my tears for, could be sitting right there in front of me, with the cold eyes of a bank manager turning down a loan. The world he wanted to give me now was a bed in some facility, a room that smelled like disinfectant, and maybe a window with a view of a brick wall. His voice pulled me back to the present. "And that's why, Mom, it's for the best. It's for your own safety." Tiffany, that woman, added in her syrupy little voice, "We just want to take care of you, Vera. You've taken care of everyone your whole life. Now let us take care of you. Take care of me." They wanted to take care of me. I looked down at the paper. It was a thick document, full of fine print they thought I couldn't read. I saw words like incompetent, power of attorney, asset management. And then it hit me. This wasn't about my health. It never was. It was about my money, my paid-off house. The small inheritance Robert left me that I never touched, saved for a real emergency. Apparently, the emergency had arrived. Only, the emergency was them. An icy feeling washed over my heart. The pain gave way to something new, something cold and sharp, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I lifted my head and looked my favorite son right in the eyes. I forced a fragile smile, the smile of a confused, scared old woman. I put my hand on his, felt the soft skin, the hand of someone who's never done a day of hard labor in his life. And with the sweetest, most defeated voice I could fake, I said, If you think it's what's best for me, son, then I'll sign." The smile that spread across Preston's face when I said I'd sign was a terrible thing to see. It was relief, you know? The relief of someone who just talked the victim into walking calmly into the trap. His shoulders, which had been up around his ears, just dropped. And Tiffany, I tell you what, her smile was even bigger, a slash of satisfaction she could barely hide. She even gave her husband a little pat on the shoulder, a "good job, honey" kind of gesture. And I saw it all. I filed away every last detail, but I wasn't going to make it easy. I'd agreed to sign, but I didn't say when. My mind, the one they thought was failing, was working at a speed I didn't even know it still had. I needed time. I needed to understand what was in that paper. My hand, which had been steady before, started to tremble on purpose. I looked at the pen he offered me, and then at the paper, and I made a confused face. "Oh, son, with my eyesight. The letters are just dancing all over the page. Where on earth did I put my reading glasses?" I started patting the table, the counter, my own head, faking a confusion that was practically an art form. I knew exactly where they were, hanging around my neck on the little chain Angela gave me. But I needed the drama. Preston, with the patience of a plaster saint, pointed with his chin. His voice was controlled, but the tip of his foot was tapping a frantic rhythm on my floor. He said the glasses were right there, hanging on me. I gave a little laugh like, "Oh, silly me, I really am getting dotty," and put them on. But inside, my brain was running a mile a minute. I picked up the stack of papers. It was heavy, much heavier than a simple commitment form. I started to flip through slowly, so very slowly. I'd read a line, stop, wipe my glasses on the hem of my blouse, and read it again. I could see the two of them shifting in their chairs. Their impatience was so thick you could feel it, like a nervous energy in my calm kitchen. And while I pretended to read, I replayed the list of my lapses he'd used against me. The stove being left on. Did I really do that? I've always been so careful. I remembered Tiffany was here that day, helping me bake a cake. She was the last one out of the kitchen. Could she have? The doubt was like a little poison seed planted in my chest. The $200 missing. I remembered my anguish, searching every drawer. And I remembered Preston showing up, so helpful, saying, "Calm down, Mom. Money comes and goes. You probably just tucked it away somewhere and forgot." He made me a coffee, calmed me down. And now he was using it against me. Then there was the doctor's appointment I missed. Preston had offered to drive me. He called me an hour before and said the appointment was at 3 o'clock. I had it written in my planner, 2 o'clock. I got confused, figured I must have made a mistake. When we got there at 3, the receptionist said the appointment had been at 2. The doctor had already left. Preston was so disappointed in me. He said in the car on the way home, "Mom, you have to pay more attention. This is getting worrisome." At the time, I felt worthless. Now, looking at his face, at that urgency to see me sign that paper, a new version of the story started to form in my head. "My, there's an awful lot of writing here, isn't there?" I said, with a tired sigh. "I think I need a glass of water. My mouth is dry." Tiffany jumped up, ready to serve me, but I held up a hand. No, dear. Let me get it myself. I still know where the faucet is." It was a tiny little jab, but I don't think they even noticed. I stood up slowly, leaning on the table, putting on the whole show of a frail old woman. As the glass filled with water, I watched them out of the corner of my eye. They were whispering. Preston was pointing at his watch. They were in a hurry, a real big hurry. I went back to the table, sipped the water in tiny little gulps. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Finally, I looked at them over the top of my glasses. "Look, I'll sign it. I trust you." I saw the relief again. "But I want Daniel and Angela to be here, to be witnesses, so they know I'm doing this of my own free will because it's what's best for me." Preston's face fell right then and there. Tiffany forced a smile. She tried to argue, said there was no need to bother the others, that this was a decision between the three of us, that they were adults and knew what was best. But I insisted, with my stubborn old lady voice. I said it was important to me, that I wanted the family together. Preston saw he wasn't going to win. He stood up, frustrated. He said he'd call his brother and sister, but it might take some time. He said they'd come back the next day, with everything arranged. He snatched the papers off the table with a certain roughness and put them back in his expensive leather briefcase. They said their goodbyes with kisses on my cheek, cold kisses that had no warmth, no affection at all. And then they were gone. As soon as the front door clicked shut, I stood still. For a good 5 minutes, I just stood there in the middle of my kitchen, listening to the silence of the house. The performance was over. My spine straightened. The tremor in my hands disappeared. The frail, confused woman left with them. In her place stood Vera, the woman who raised 4 children on her own, the woman who negotiated with bank managers, who stood up to nosy neighbors, who survived. I walked over to the kitchen trash can to throw out the morning's coffee filter. An automatic motion, a 50-year routine. And that's when I saw it. Crumpled up amidst the eggshells and used napkins was a piece of blue and white paper. Something about the color caught my eye. With my fingertips, I picked it out. It was a thin piece of paper from a bank statement. I carefully smoothed it out on the table. It was a credit card bill. The name at the top of the page made my heart leap. Preston R. Collins. My son. And at the bottom, circled in red with a note that said, "Urgent past due," was the balance. $27,482.16. My blood ran cold. $27,000. What on earth was going on? Why would he throw this away at my house? The desperation in his eyes, the hurry. It all started to make a terrible kind of sense. This wasn't concern, it was desperation. And the cure for his desperation, it seemed, was my house and my money. I just sat there at my kitchen table with that smoothed-out credit card statement of Preston's in front of me. $27,000. The numbers seemed to jump off the page, dancing in front of my eyes. The buzzing I'd felt when he asked me to sign the commitment, papers came back, but this time it was different. It was louder, clearer. It was the sound of all the pieces clicking into place, forming a picture I didn't want, but had to see. My first instinct was to call him. Call him and scream. Ask him what in the hell he thought he was doing. Demand an explanation. The mother in me wanted to believe there was some terrible mistake, a logical reason for all of this. Maybe he was helping a friend. Maybe it was a business deal gone sour. My mind was desperately searching for an excuse for him. But the 72-year-old woman that life had taught not to be a fool knew it was no use. Confronting him now would be a mistake. He'd lie. He'd manipulate me, use my emotions against me, call me crazy, paranoid. And in the state I was in, I might have even believed him. No, I needed more. I needed to be sure. I folded the statement carefully, like it was a piece of evidence in a crime, and maybe it was, and I tucked it inside my old recipe book, between the page for cornbread and the one for Robert's beef stew. Nobody would ever look there. I spent a sleepless night. Every creak in the house made me jump. The settling of the wood, the hum of the refrigerator. Everything sounded louder. I replayed every visit, every phone call from the last 6 months. His insistence that I write a new will. Just to update things, Mom. It's important. The time he brought his friend, a real estate agent, over to appraise the house out of curiosity, so you know what a treasure you're sitting on. The casual questions about my pension, about Robert's life insurance. At the time, I saw it as the concern of a loving son. Now it felt like he was taking inventory. He was measuring me for my coffin, and I hadn't even noticed. In the morning, with a tired face and puffy eyes, I knew what I had to do. I needed an outside voice, someone who wasn't in the middle of this hurricane. But I couldn't call Daniel, my oldest. He was headstrong and impulsive. He'd go confront Preston right away and blow everything. Angela, my daughter, was a soft touch, easily swayed. Preston had probably already gotten to her, convinced her that Mama was in need of care. That left Kevin, my youngest, the one who never quite got his act together, who was always borrowing money, but who, out of all of them, had the purest heart. I waited until mid-afternoon so I wouldn't seem desperate. I dialed his number. When he answered with his usual cheerful voice, I forced mine to sound normal, the voice of a mother just checking in on her boy. We talked about his kids, about his new job at the auto shop, and then, as casual as can be, I cast my line. Son, tell me something. Have you talked to your brother Preston lately? I called him yesterday and he seemed so rushed. Is everything all right? There was a silence on the other end of the line. A silence that lasted maybe 3 seconds, but to me it felt like an eternity. And then Kevin just spilled it. His voice got low, like he was telling a secret. He told me things weren't going well for Preston, that he and Tiffany were living a millionaire's lifestyle, with trips to Europe, cars worth more than my house, dinners at restaurants where one plate cost my whole month's pension check. He said there was a rumor going around, an ugly one, about Preston getting mixed up with the wrong people, with some high-risk investments that sounded more like gambling. My heart tightened. I asked if it was serious. And then Kevin said the words that finally buried the foolish, proud mother who still lived inside me. He said, his voice full of sadness, "Mom, Preston's living in a world that isn't his. He's always been ashamed of where we came from. And sooner or later the bill comes due for everyone." I hung up the phone, and the tears I'd been holding back for almost 24 hours finally came. I cried, sitting in my late husband's armchair. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for my own stupidity, my own blindness. How could I not have seen it? How could I have raised a son who was ashamed of me, of our story, of the sacrifice I made to make him who he was? I cried for putting him on a pedestal, while my other children, with all their flaws, had never abandoned me. I walked through the house, touching the furniture. I looked at the bookshelf in the living room. There was the set of encyclopedias I bought on a 12-month payment plan because Preston, at 10 years old, said he wanted to know everything in the world. I bought those expensive books at a time when the kitchen roof had a leak. The leak stayed, but my son had the world's knowledge at his fingertips. I looked at his graduation picture, my golden boy, smiling with his diploma in hand. My diploma. I had paid for every letter on that piece of paper, and then the grief began to change. The tears dried up, and in their place, something hard and cold as a stone settled in. It was rage, a cold, calculating rage, the rage of a lioness who realizes the predator isn't outside the den, but inside it, and it's her own cub. They thought I was a weak, senile old woman, easy to fool. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten the woman who faced the world alone with 4 children. They had made a mistake. A very, very big mistake. I picked up the phone again. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. My fingers dialed a number I'd known by heart for 40 years. The voice on the other end answered on the second ring. A warm, familiar voice. And I said, my voice thick, but not with sadness, with an urgency that came from the bottom of my soul. Sarah, it's me, Vera. I need help. I think my own son is trying to destroy me. On the other end of the line, Sarah was silent for a moment. I've known Sarah since our kids were in diapers. She watched Preston grow up. She saw my sacrifices. She was the only person in the world who knew about my grandfather's ring that I sold to pay for his textbooks. Her silence wasn't doubt. It was shock. Finally, her voice came out, firm as it always was. She didn't ask a million questions. She just said, Vera, don't you leave that house. I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like the longest of my life. I paced back and forth in my living room. I felt vulnerable, exposed. My home, which had always been my safe harbor, now felt like enemy territory. Every document, every photo on the wall could be used against me. When the doorbell rang, I ran to answer it like the cavalry had arrived. Sarah came in, gave me a strong hug, the kind that puts your soul back in place, and made me sit down. With the calm of a general on a battlefield, she told me to tell her everything, from the beginning, without crying. And I did. I told her about Preston and Tiffany's visit. I told her about his cold voice, the hurry in his eyes. I told her about the lapses he'd listed. I showed her the crumpled credit card statement I'd hidden in the recipe book. And I told her about the conversation with Kevin, about the life of luxury and the rumors of debt. As I spoke, Sarah's face grew harder and harder. She didn't interrupt me once. She just listened, with those sharp eyes that don't miss a thing. When I finished, she took the statement, looked at that ridiculous number, and shook her head slowly. She didn't say, I can't believe it, or, what a terrible son. She looked me right in the eye and said something that gave me the strength I needed. She said, Vera, they underestimated you. They thought you were the same woman who'd just bow her head to everything. They forgot who they're dealing with. She stood up and grabbed her purse. She said crying wasn't going to fix a thing, that we needed a professional, and not just any professional. She said we needed a shark, and she knew one. An old-school lawyer, semi-retired, but who loved a good fight, especially against rich, arrogant people. His name was Arthur Henderson. I hesitated. Lawyer. The word sent a chill down my spine. That was Preston's world. He knew all the tricks, all the loopholes. How could I, a retired old woman, fight my own son on his home turf? Sarah saw my hesitation. She held my chin and made me look at her. Vera, your son declared war on you inside your own house. You have 2 choices. You can surrender and go wither away in some home while he burns through your money, or you can fight. Which is it gonna be? That shook me. She was right. Preston's mother died in that moment. The woman who survived everything else was reborn. I took a deep breath and said, "We fight." The next day, Sarah drove me to Mr. Henderson's office. It was an old room, filled with leather-bound books and smelling of wood polish and old paper. He was a tall, thin man, with white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He served us coffee and asked me to tell him the whole story without leaving anything out. I told it all again, and he, just like Sarah, listened in silence. The only thing he did was jot down a few notes on a yellow legal pad. When I was done, he sat there for a long time, looking at his notes. I was starting to get nervous, thinking he was going to say there was nothing he could do. Finally, he looked up, and for the first time, I saw a glint in his eyes, a glint of interest, almost of amusement. He said in a calm voice, "Mrs. Collins, your son is ambitious, but he's an amateur, and he's greedy. Greed makes people sloppy." He asked me to describe the papers Preston wanted me to sign. I described them as best I could, the thickness, the words I'd managed to glimpse. He nodded as if he already knew. He explained that it wasn't a simple commitment request. It was much worse. It was a petition for a conservatorship with full power of attorney. In plain English, they wanted a judge to declare me mentally incompetent and for Preston to become the legal owner of everything I had. He could sell my house, clean out my bank accounts, and I couldn't do a single thing about it. He would have the legal right to put me in a home and use my money to pay for it. And whatever was left over, well, whatever was left over would be theirs. My stomach turned over. It was more sordid than I had imagined. I asked him what I could do, and then Mr. Henderson smiled. A thin smile, the smile of a man who just saw the perfect move in a chess game. He said we were going to use their arrogance against them, that their hurry was our greatest asset. He turned to an old printer in the corner of the room and started preparing some documents. As the pages came out, he explained the plan. It was audacious, it was risky, and it was absolutely brilliant. He turned to me and handed me a small stack of papers, 4 or 5 pages, much thinner than Preston's. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "Mrs. Collins, your son is going to come back, probably tomorrow, with his siblings, to pressure you into signing. And you are going to sign their document, without hesitation." My eyes widened in confusion. Sarah, beside me, was just as tense. The lawyer continued, with that shark's grin on his face. "But 5 minutes before you sign their document, in front of 2 witnesses you trust, you are going to sign this one." He tapped his finger on the paper he'd just given me. "This document, my dear lady, creates an irrevocable trust. Basically, it takes everything that's yours, the house, the savings, every penny, and puts it into a legal lockbox, with a trustee we trust in control. From the moment you sign this, you will legally no longer own anything. And the power of attorney your son will have in his hands won't be worth the paper it's printed on." He paused, letting the information sink in. And then he finished, his eyes gleaming. "They are going to walk out of your house thinking they've won the lottery. And they will only find out the truth when they try to cash the ticket. And then, the show will begin." I spent the rest of that day and the next night rehearsing my part. In front of my bedroom mirror, I practiced the vacant stare, the trembling hand, the weak voice of someone losing their grip on the world. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold calm, a determination I hadn't felt since the days I had to fight to put food on the table for 4 hungry children. I was no longer a frightened victim. I was an actress about to walk on stage for the most important performance of my life. Just as Mr. Henderson predicted, Preston called me the next morning. His voice was pure honey. He said he'd talked to Daniel and Angela, that they all agreed it was for the best, and that they were coming over to give me support. The support of a pack of wolves surrounding a lamb, I thought. I answered with a wisp of a voice, said, "All right, if it had to be, then so be it." He said they'd arrive around 2 in the afternoon. It was showtime. I spent the morning preparing. I called Sarah and my next-door neighbor, Mr. Gable, a retired professor, a kind man, and above all suspicion. I explained only what was necessary, following the lawyer's instructions. I told them my son wanted me to sign some important papers, and that for my own safety, my lawyer had instructed me to sign another document first, in front of witnesses. I asked them to come at 1:30 and to act as naturally as possible. They agreed, their voices grave. They knew something big was happening. At 2:00 sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, summoned the frail old woman from within, and went to answer. There they were, all three of them. Preston, in his expensive suit and the somber air of a concerned son. Tiffany beside him, in a tasteful dress and an expression of angelic sympathy that made my stomach turn. And my other two children. Angela's eyes were red, like she'd been crying the whole way over. Daniel stood with his arms crossed, his face grim, looking anywhere but at me. Preston had done his work well, poisoning his siblings' minds against their own mother. I shrank into my favorite armchair as they came in. My voice came out weak, a thread. So many people. Is it a party? I almost laughed at the look of discomfort on Preston's face. He hurried to say no, that they were here as we'd arranged, for our family matter. He placed his leather briefcase on the coffee table and took out the same stack of papers from the other day. His hand hovered over the documents. He looked at me, and I knew he was assessing my mental state, so I gave him what he wanted to see. I looked out the window with a lost gaze and commented on a little bird that wasn't there. I saw him exchange an "I told you so" look with Daniel. My Oscar was in the bag. Just as he started to speak, with that patronizing voice, explaining what the document was, the doorbell rang again. Preston frowned. "Are you expecting someone else, Mom?" I put on my best confused face. "Oh, I don't know, son. Could it be the mailman?" I went to the door. It was Sarah and Mr. Gable. I greeted them with a relieved smile. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Come in, come in." Preston stood up, his irritation barely disguised. Tiffany forced a pained smile. He asked what they were doing here, and I cast my bait. "Oh, son, I invited them. You know how it is. Such a big decision. I wanted people who really know me, my lifelong friend and my neighbor of many years, to make sure I'm not doing something foolish, so they can see I'm signing because I want to." That disarmed him completely. How could he say no? It would be admitting he was doing something underhanded. He had to agree through gritted teeth. He invited Sarah and Mr. Gable to sit, with the hospitality of a man inviting a cockroach into his kitchen. The room was full and silent. You could have cut the tension with a knife. I took a deep breath. It was time. "Well, since we're all here," I began, my voice trembling, "there's one paper I need to sign first." And to Preston's horror, I stood up, walked to my bookshelf, and picked up the document Mr. Henderson had given me, which I'd left there in plain sight. "This one? The man from the bank gave it to me the other day. Said it was important for organizing my affairs. I suppose I should sign it now, shouldn't I?" Preston's face tightened. He tried to take the paper from my hand, saying he could look it over first, as my lawyer. But I was quicker. I turned to Mr. Gable. "Would you mind reading the title out loud for me, Professor? My eyes are just so bad today." Mr. Gable, a methodical man, put on his glasses and read in his clear, professorial voice, "Declaration of the Irrevocable Trust of Vera Collins." Preston froze. The word irrevocable hung in the air. But before he could process or protest, I already had the pen in my hand. Oh, a trust. What a fancy name. Well, let's get this over with. With my hand still feigning a tremor, I signed my name on the dotted line. I passed the paper to Sarah, who signed as the first witness, her eyes fixed on Preston. Then I passed it to Mr. Gable, who signed as the second. Done. The deed was done. The lockbox was sealed. I handed the signed document to Sarah and asked her, with a sweet smile, to keep it for me in a safe place. She put it in her purse without a word. Then I turned back to my son. His face was a mask of confusion and contained rage. He didn't understand what had just happened, but he knew something had gone off script. I held out my hand. "Now yours, son. Let's finish this." "I'm getting tired." He hesitated for a second. He glanced at Tiffany, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Stick to the plan." Their greed was stronger than their suspicion. He handed me his stack of papers and the pen. I took the papers. I felt their weight in my hand. It was the weight of betrayal, of ingratitude. I looked at Angela, who was crying softly in the corner. I looked at Daniel, who was staring at the floor, ashamed. And I looked at Preston, my golden boy, his eyes full of expectation and greed. I let out a deep sigh, a sigh of defeat that I had rehearsed all night. With the shakiest hand of all, I signed my name on the dotted line, the signature that, in their minds, declared me incompetent, the signature that gave them control of everything. I saw the glint of victory in Preston's eyes. Tiffany exchanged a look with him that said, "We did it." He took the papers from my hand with a swiftness that bordered on rude, tucked them into his briefcase, and stood up. The concerned son act was over. They said their goodbyes in a hurry, saying that now they would take care of everything. They left in a rush, like thieves afraid the homeowner might wake up. Angela came to give me a tearful hug and left without saying a word. Daniel just put a hand on my shoulder and was gone too. Mr. Gable said his goodbyes, telling me he'd be right there if I needed anything. The instant the door closed for the last time, I sat up straight in my armchair. The trembling, frightened old woman vanished like smoke. Sarah, who had stayed behind, was watching me with wide eyes, waiting. I looked at her. A small smile formed on the corner of my mouth. My eyes, which moments before were vacant and lost, were now clear and cold as ice. They fell for it. After everyone left, Sarah and I sat in silence for a long time. She made us some chamomile tea, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where, less than 48 hours before, my world had been turned upside down. But now, the feeling was different. There was no more fear. There was an anticipation, a tension in the air, like the calm before a big storm. Sarah squeezed my hand across the table. She said, "You were incredible, Vera. A real actress." I just shook my head. I didn't feel incredible. I felt tired. And a deep sadness ached in my heart. As much as rage was driving me, deep down, he was my son. The boy I had carried in my arms, and I had just set a trap for him. It was necessary, I knew. But it hurt. It hurt in a way only a mother can understand. I spent the rest of the afternoon and the whole night in a daze. Mr. Henderson called around 5 to confirm that Sarah had delivered the signed trust document to him. He said he'd be filing it with the registries first thing in the morning and notifying my bank. He instructed me to act normally. "Just wait," he said. "They will come to you." And so I waited. I tried to read a book, but the words made no sense. I tried to watch television, but the noise just irritated me. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. It was a terrible anxiety, knowing that the life I knew was about to change forever, and that I was the one who had pushed the button. The next day dawned gray and rainy, a perfect match for my mood. I can just picture the scene across town. Preston and Tiffany probably woke up thrilled. They must have had a celebratory breakfast, toasting their success with expensive orange juice. They had the paper, the weapon that would give them access to everything I had built. They thought they were kings of the world. I know from what Mr. Henderson explained to me later that they wasted no time. Around 10 in the morning, they walked into the main branch of my bank, the same one where I've had an account since I married Robert. They must have walked in with their heads held high, Preston with his leather briefcase, Tiffany with her air of superiority. They asked to speak to the manager, a man named Mr. Peterson, who has known me for over 30 years. They presented the papers. The power of attorney I had signed, naming them my legal guardians. Mr. Peterson, a cautious man, examined everything carefully. He confirmed the signature was mine, that the document appeared to be legal. I can just imagine the triumphant smirk on Tiffany's face. Preston then got right to the point. He said that as my new administrator, he would like to make a transfer. He wanted to move $75,000 from my savings account, the one I never touched, into his account. He must have given some flimsy excuse, something about consolidating investments or seeking a better return for my money. Mr. Peterson listened to it all patiently. When Preston finished, he just adjusted his glasses and looked at his computer screen. He typed a few things, clicked the mouse a couple of times. The room must have fallen silent, a silence thick with their anticipation. Finally, the manager looked up at them over his computer, and with the calmest, most professional voice in the world, he informed them that the power of attorney they held was, in fact, valid. However, it was also completely useless. I would have given anything to see the look on their faces in that moment. The manager explained that first thing that morning, the bank had received a legal notification. A document signed by me, Vera Collins, the previous afternoon, in the presence of 2 witnesses, had activated an irrevocable trust. He explained, in banker's terms, that all of my assets, the house, the checking accounts, the savings, the small investments, had been legally transferred to the administration of this trust. And the legal trustee was not Preston Collins. It was a law firm designated by Mr. Henderson. The manager concluded by saying that, legally, Mrs. Vera Collins's bank account had a balance of $0.00. Therefore, there was nothing to transfer. The shock. Oh, the sweet, delicious shock. Preston, the great lawyer, must have been speechless. He probably stammered, said it was a mistake, that he was the legal guardian, that his mother was incompetent. But Mr. Peterson, following protocol, simply stated that the trust document, having been signed and filed before the power of attorney took effect, had legal precedence. The power of attorney gave him power over me, the person, but not over the trust. And I, the person, no longer owned a thing. The lockbox was sealed, and he was on the outside, holding the wrong key. They left the bank empty-handed. Their morning's victory had turned to ash. I can just imagine the furious argument in the car. Tiffany screaming, Preston trying to figure out how his mother, the senile, confused old woman, could have done this. How could she have outsmarted him? I didn't have to wait long. Around noon, my phone rang. The name on the display sent a shiver down my spine. Preston. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, and answered, using my most normal, clear, and lucid voice. The voice of the old Vera, the mother he thought he had buried. Yes, son? How can I help you? On the other end of the line, there was just the sound of heavy, shocked breathing, a silence that screamed louder than any word. He couldn't speak. He wasn't expecting that voice. He was expecting the confused old lady, the woman he had declared incompetent. His silence was his confession. It was the sound of an arrogant man realizing that the floor had just vanished from under his feet, too, and that the one who had pulled the rug was his own mother. That silence on the phone lasted what felt like a lifetime. I could hear Preston's ragged breathing, the sound of his world falling apart. I waited. I wouldn't speak first. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. Finally, his voice came out, a choked whisper, full of disbelief. He managed just one word. Mom? It was a question, not a greeting. It was as if he were seeing a ghost. I answered, with the same calm I'd used to talk about the weather. Yes, Preston, it's me. Did something happen? You sound flustered. He tried to pull himself together. The lawyer inside him took over, trying to find some logic, some way out. He started stammering about the bank, about a misunderstanding, about a trust. He asked what I had done. The arrogance was gone from his voice. What was left was pure, simple panic. And I, for the first time in years, felt completely in control. What did I do, son? I just organized my finances. That's what you advised me to do, wasn't it? To get everything in order. I used his own words against him. But you know, I think this is too complicated a matter to discuss over the phone. And as you said yourself, it's a family matter. So I want all of you here, tonight at 7, for dinner. He tried to protest. He said it wasn't a good time, that they needed to talk alone. But I cut him off. My voice became firm, hard as steel. 7 o'clock, Preston. You, Tiffany, Daniel, and Angela. And don't be late. We have a lot to talk about. And I hung up, without waiting for a reply. The next hour was a blur. I called the other two. To Daniel, I said it was an urgent family dinner, and his presence was non-negotiable. For Angela, I used a softer tone. I said, "Honey, I need you here tonight. I need you to listen to your mother." She started crying on the phone, saying she was so confused. I just told her to come. I didn't cook anything special. I just heated up a frozen lasagna. This wasn't a celebratory dinner. It was a court-martial. I set the formal dining room table, the one we only used for holidays, with the good china. I wanted the full effect. I wanted them to understand the gravity of the moment. Promptly at 7, they arrived. Not together, like a family, but one by one, like strangers heading to a condo board meeting. Daniel came first with his usual grim face, then Angela, her face puffy, and last, the couple of the year, Preston and Tiffany. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 5 hours. Preston's face was gray, Tiffany had dark circles under her eyes. The air in the room grew heavy, unbreathable. No one said a word during dinner. The only sound was the clinking of silverware on plates. No one seemed to have an appetite. I ate my piece of lasagna slowly, savoring not the food, but their uncomfortable silence. I was in charge. They knew it. When everyone had finished, I stood up and went to the sideboard. I picked up a small folder Mr. Henderson had prepared for me. I returned to the table, sat at the head, and placed the folder in front of me. "Well," I began, and my voice rang out loud and clear in the silent room. "I imagine you're all wondering why I've called you here." I looked at each of them. Daniel was staring at me with curiosity. Angela was looking at her own lap. Preston and Tiffany were glaring at me, a mixture of hatred and fear in their eyes. "Preston, my son, you and your wife came here yesterday and asked me to sign a document. You told me it was to have me committed for my own good because I was getting senile, forgetful." Angela sobbed. Daniel looked at his brother with a shocked expression. He hadn't known the details. I continued, opening the folder. "But the paper you gave me wasn't quite that, was it? It was a petition for a conservatorship. A document that would declare me legally insane and give you, Preston, total control over everything I own." I took out a copy of the document that Mr. Henderson had obtained and tossed it onto the middle of the table. "It's all right here. Asset management. Full power of attorney. Fancy words for theft, don't you think?" Tiffany gasped. "That's absurd. We were just trying to help." I ignored her. My eyes were fixed on Preston. "You used little incidents, some that you perhaps even caused yourself, to try and convince me and your siblings that I'd lost my mind, all to get your hands on my money. And the million-dollar question is, why? Why such desperation?" I paused dramatically. And then I pulled the second paper from my folder, the crumpled credit card statement. I placed it on the table right next to the copy of the power of attorney. $27,000, Preston. Is that it? Is this your emergency? A credit card debt? The blood drained from his face. But before he could answer, I went on. My quiet investigation had gone much deeper than that one statement. Mr. Henderson had his contacts. He'd made a few calls. "But you know what I found out, my son? $27,000 is just the tip of the iceberg. That's just what you owe the banks. The real problem is much bigger, isn't it?" I looked at Tiffany. Her face fell apart. She knew what I was talking about. "Turns out my lawyer discovered some very interesting things about your high-risk investments. Found out you don't just owe the banks with their polite interest rates and collection letters. You owe people who don't send letters, do you, Preston? People who collect in a different way." The silence in the room was absolute. It felt like even breathing had stopped. My other children were staring at me, trying to understand where this was all going. I leaned forward over the table, and my voice dropped low, but every word landed like a stone. "Your debt isn't $27,000. It's $150,000. And you don't owe it to Bank of America. You owe it to loan sharks. Dangerous men who don't give a damn about your law degree or your wife's family name." I saw the pure terror in their eyes. They had no idea I knew. They thought they were dealing with a naive old woman. They forgot I survived things much worse than bad men wanting money. I survived poverty, widowhood, hunger, and I would do anything to protect what was mine. They had just messed with the wrong person. Preston's face transformed. The color drained from it completely, leaving his skin a sickly, grayish color. Tiffany started to shake, a fine, almost imperceptible tremor, but I saw it. She brought a hand to her mouth, like she was going to be sick right there on my dining room table. The great lawyer and his sophisticated wife, reduced to 2 terrified children, caught stealing candy from the corner store. Daniel, my oldest, who until then had just been watching, leaned forward. His voice was hoarse. "Mom, what is this? Loan sharks? $150,000? He looked at his brother with a mixture of disgust and pity. Angela just cried, her face buried in her hands. The perfect family I had tried to build was crumbling to pieces right in front of me. Preston finally found his voice, but it wasn't the voice of the confident lawyer. It was the voice of my 6-year-old boy, scared in the dark. "Mom, how do you know all this?" I smiled. But it wasn't a mother's smile. It was a cold smile, devoid of any warmth. "I know a lot of things, son. I know you spent money you didn't have to keep up appearances. I know Tiffany has expensive taste." I glanced at the diamond ring on her finger, a ring worth more than my car. "And I know that you, to finance this life, made stupid bets, and you lost big." He hung his head. It was a silent confession. He couldn't deny it. Tiffany, recovering a shred of her usual arrogance, tried to defend herself. "We were going to pay you back. Every penny. It was just a rough patch. We were going to sell some stock. I cut her off with a wave of my hand. "Pay me back? You were going to pay me back with my own money? After you locked me in a home and sold my house? Don't make me laugh, dear. Your mask has slipped." The room fell into that heavy silence again. They were waiting for the next shoe to drop. Maybe they expected me to scream, to throw them out, to disinherit them. They had no idea what was coming. Mr. Henderson's plan was much more creative. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands on the table. My voice was calm, almost professorial, as if I were explaining a recipe. When I found out about this debt, about these men, I had a choice to make. I looked at Preston. I could have just protected myself. Let you two deal with the problems you created. That would have been fair, wouldn't it? Let you learn your lesson the hard way. I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. He thought that was it, that I would just abandon them to their fate. Bless his heart. He still didn't get it. "I could have done that," I continued. "But the problem is, your disgrace would still stain our family's name, your father's name, and that I could not allow. So, I did something else." I paused, letting the suspense build. "With a portion of my money, the money that is now safe and sound and far from your greedy hands, I took action. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, he made some calls. He's a man with many resources, and he found your creditors." Preston's head shot up. The panic flooded back into his eyes with full force. "Mom, no. What did you do? You can't get involved with those people. They're dangerous." Well, look at that. Suddenly he's worried about me. How touching. I ignored him and went on. We had a conversation. It was an interesting negotiation. They wanted their money, of course, and I wanted the problem solved. So we reached an agreement. Everyone at the table held their breath. I looked directly into the eyes of my favorite son, the golden boy I had raised to be a winner, and I delivered the final blow. "I didn't pay off your debt, Preston." I saw the confusion on his face, the hope draining away. "I bought it." It took a second for the information to register. Daniel frowned, not understanding. Angela stopped crying and stared at me, her eyes wide. Tiffany just trembled. Preston understood immediately. The blood vanished from his face once more. He understood the depth of what I had done. I explained, so there would be no doubt. "Your $150,000 debt didn't disappear. It wasn't forgiven. It just changed ownership. As of today, you no longer owe a bunch of faceless criminals. Now you owe me. I stood up from my chair, feeling a power I never imagined I could possess. I walked over to where he sat, paralyzed, and I leaned in, speaking low, so only he and his wife could hear. And I will collect every single penny, with interest. But my interest isn't like theirs. Mine is worse, because with every payment, every single month, you will have to look me in the eye. You will have to remember what you tried to do to your own mother. And that is a debt you will spend the rest of your life paying. I stepped back. The wounded lioness was gone. She had become the ringmaster, and the terrified clowns finally understood that the show was over. After I said those words, the room was so quiet I could hear the tick-tock of my grandfather's pendulum clock, a sound I hadn't noticed in years. Preston looked like a wax statue. The shock was so great he couldn't even move. Tiffany, on the other hand, started to have a silent crying fit, the ugly kind, with her face all scrunched up, making no sound. It was Daniel who broke the spell. He stood up slowly, pushed his chair under the table, and looked at his brother. He didn't say anything, just shook his head in denial, with an expression of pure disgust. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see resentment in my oldest son's eyes. I saw respect. A reluctant, shocked respect, but it was there. He just gave a short nod and walked out without a word to anyone. Angela, seeing Daniel leave, shot up in a panic, as if she were being left behind. She looked from me to Preston, completely lost, and then ran out after her brother, still sobbing. And then there were just 3 of us. Me at the head of the table and the broken couple. It took a full minute for Preston to get to his feet. He leaned on the chair. His legs seemed weak. He didn't look at me. He just took Tiffany's hand and pulled her along, like he was dragging dead weight. They left my house without a single look back. The sound of the door slamming was the final punctuation on the family I thought I had. The next day, Mr. Henderson got to work. He was like a surgeon, precise and unemotional. He sent the official notification to Preston. Not to his house, but to the fancy law firm where he worked. A process server delivered the envelope in front of his partners. I know this because Mr. Henderson made sure it happened that way. He said public humiliation was part of the process. The terms of the agreement I imposed were strict. It was the only way. I wasn't doing it for pleasure, I was doing it for justice. They had 90 days to liquidate their assets and make the first payment, $50,000. Their luxury condo was put up for sale. Tiffany's BMW and Preston's Mercedes, too. They had to move into a small rented apartment in a neighborhood they probably didn't even know existed before. The rest of the debt, the $100,000, was divided into 60 monthly payments, with interest. Market rate interest, Mr. Henderson insisted. Every month I received a deposit into the trust's account, and, at my insistence, Preston had to send me a detailed monthly report, a spreadsheet with every dollar that came in and went out of their house. I wanted him to feel, every single day, the weight of the control he had tried to have over me. Now, I was the one controlling his life. The news, of course, got around. First in the family. Daniel called me a week later. We talked for almost an hour. He admitted he was shocked, that he never imagined I had that in me. He told me Preston had called him, desperate, asking to borrow money to try and pay me. Daniel said he refused. He told his brother something that made me cry after I hung up. He said, "You dug this hole, Preston. You and your wife. Now learn how to get out of it. Mom gave you everything, and you tried to take the little she had left. I'm not going to help you spit in the plate that fed you." Angela was more complicated. She would call me crying, saying I was being too hard, that he was my son, that the family was falling apart. She felt sorry for him. I had to be firm with her, as much as it hurt. I said, "Angela, he made his bed. Now he has to lie in it. Think about what he was going to do to me. Think about where I would be right now if his plan had worked. Would you be visiting me in a nursing home on Sundays? She had no answer for that. Our relationship became strained, distant. And then came the community. At church, I became the main topic of conversation. People were divided. My closest friends, like Sarah, defended me tooth and nail. They said I did what any mother lion would do to protect herself. But there was the other side. There was a Mrs. Eleanor, whose son was also a lawyer, who came to talk to me after the service, with that holier-than-thou look on her face. She said, "Vera, dear, I understand your pain. But forgiveness, doesn't the Bible teach us to forgive 70 times 7? I looked right at that woman and thought, it's easy to talk about forgiveness when it wasn't your son who tried to rob you and throw you in a warehouse for old people. But I just smiled and said, Eleanor, forgiveness is a two-way street. He never asked for my forgiveness. He just got caught. That conversation showed me that many people prefer a false peace to an uncomfortable truth. The months went by. The routine of the payments was established. I didn't see or speak to Preston. The only communication was the cold spreadsheet that arrived in my email at the end of every month. I saw their expenses, rent, groceries, the electric bill, the life of normal people they had despised so much. No trips to Europe, no expensive restaurants, just harsh reality. One Tuesday night, about 6 months after that dinner, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered, suspicious. On the other end, a tearful, almost unrecognizable voice said, "Vera? It's me, Tiffany." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't say anything. I just waited. She started talking, a desperate and pathetic monologue. She told me their life was ruined, that they had lost all their friends, that Preston wasn't the same man, that he barely got out of bed, that he was just an empty shell of who he used to be. She cried, she begged, she pleaded for the love of God that I forgive the debt, that I give them a second chance, that I not destroy my own son's life. She talked for about 10 minutes straight, spitting out words of pity and despair. I listened to it all, every word, every sob, in silence. When she finally stopped, waiting for a response, a crumb of compassion, I held the phone firmly. My voice came out colder than I intended. Mercy is what I expected from a son, Tiffany. What I got was a piece of paper to have me discarded. Now, I only deal in justice. And I hung up the phone on her. After that phone call from Tiffany, I thought I would feel victorious. But to be honest, the only thing I felt was a vast emptiness. I hung up the phone and looked around my house. The house I loved, the house Robert had built. But suddenly, every corner seemed haunted. The kitchen reminded me of my son's arrogant face. The dining room, of the silence of that last family supper. The walls seemed to have absorbed all the pain, all the betrayal. I realized that to truly heal, I couldn't keep living in that mausoleum of broken memories. The following week, I made a decision that shocked everyone, even Sarah. I called Mr. Henderson and gave him a new instruction. I said, "Sell the house." He was surprised, but he understood. In less than a month, the house where I raised my 4 children, where I mourned my husband's death and fought every day of my life, was sold. With the money from the sale and the savings that were now safe in the trust, I had more than I ever dreamed I'd have. And for the first time in my life, I didn't think about saving it for my children, investing for their future, ensuring their security. I thought about me. Today it's been a little over a year since that fateful day. And my life, my goodness, my life is completely different. I don't live in Nashville anymore. I sold almost everything, donated the old furniture, kept only the photos and a few of Robert's things. And I moved into a beautiful apartment in Florida with a balcony overlooking the ocean. Every morning, I sit on that balcony with my cup of coffee and watch the sun rise over the water. And I breathe. I breathe air that doesn't smell like the past, like pain, like ingratitude. Kevin, my youngest, came to visit last month with my grandkids. He helped me with the move. He's my right-hand man now. The money from the trust is paying for his children's college. I don't give him the cash, no sir. I pay the tuition bill directly to the university. I learned my lesson. Kevin told me that Preston and Tiffany are still living that tight little life. He saw her at Walmart the other day, pushing a cart, her hair roots showing and her face worn out. Their expense spreadsheet still comes every month, right on time. Mr. Henderson manages that for me. They still have about 3 years of payments left. Preston, my golden boy, lost his job at the law firm. The story, one way or another, got out. And nobody wants a lawyer who tried to outsmart his own mother and lost. He's working now as a junior consultant for a small company. Makes about 1/3 of what he used to. His humiliation is the interest payment on my soul. They lost everything they tried to steal from me. And on top of that, they lost their status, their friends, their dignity. With Daniel, our relationship is better than it's ever been. He calls me every Sunday. For the first time, he sees me not as the mother who always favored his brother, but as a strong woman. He told me on the phone the other day, "Mom, I have never been so proud of you." That meant more to me than any amount of money. Angela, she's still distant. I think she can't reconcile the image of the sweet little mother she had with the woman I had to become. She sends me cards on holidays. Maybe one day she'll understand. Maybe she won't. And I've had to learn to live with that. I traveled. I went to Italy, something I dreamed of my entire life. I saw the Colosseum, ate real pasta, drank wine looking out over the hills of Tuscany. I traveled alone, a 73-year-old woman discovering the world. And everywhere I went, I thought of Robert. And I felt he was right there with me, smiling, happy that I was finally living. I learned that a mother's love isn't unconditional. It's strong, it's powerful, but it can't be a blank check for disrespect and cruelty. I learned that sometimes you have to cut off a part of yourself to save the rest of your body. And I learned that family isn't just the blood that runs in your veins. It's respect, it's loyalty. It's Sarah, who stood by me. It's Mr. Gable, my neighbor. It's even Mr. Henderson, with his shark smile and his just heart. And sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the family you were born into. Today, I live in peace. Preston is paying his financial debt to me. But the moral debt, the one for breaking his own mother's heart, that one, he will never be able to repay. And that is his real punishment. So, what would you do in my place? Do you think I did the right thing, buying my own son's debt and collecting every last cent? Or should I have forgiven him? Write in the comments what city you're listening from. And if you liked my story, please leave a thumbs up on the video so the channel can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. On the screen, you'll see another story that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click on it to watch. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, don't forget to subscribe. Okay? See you later.